Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about an overview of photosynthesis. The first thing that we want to discuss is light. There is a visible spectrum of light and there's also an invisible spectrum of light. As you can see right here, the visible spectrum of light is actually a very small spectrum, and there are many other types of light such as X-ray and microwave and radio. Those are all wavelengths of light that we cannot see, but they're very helpful for us in our daily life. Well, the one thing that's really important for plants to have is pigment. The reason why most plants are green, at least during the summer, is because they have chloroplast that consists the pigment called chlorophyll. So you need to know that there's a difference between chloroplast and chlorophyll. Chloroplast is an organelle in the plant cell, and the chlorophyll is the pigment inside of chloroplast. So pigments, what they really are, they're not just colors. What they do is that they absorb light. And while they're absorbing light, they're also absorbing energy. So photosynthesis allows organisms to use pigments to capture energy from light. So it's important to know the function of a pigment for the plants, at least, is to capture energy from sunlight. If you look at this graph right here, on the bottom, you can see different colors, and on the y-axis, you can see how much of that light is being absorbed. As you can see, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B absorb a lot of purple, blue light, and then it also absorbs a little bit of the red-orange light. In the end, the light that's being reflected the most is kind of a green-yellow light. So when you look at plants, they're mostly green. The reflected light is what you actually see. So in the fall, what happens is that the chlorophyll in plants actually break down, and because plants have not just chlorophyll as one type of pigment, it has other pigments, you're able to see the different colors of leaves. So now, you've already done this for your homework, so let's do this together. Draw it on your notes. We have chloroplast and we want to label it. There are three parts that you need to know. The thylakoid, stroma, and where the chlorophylls are located. So the thylakoids are each one of these little discs. So this is a thylakoid, this is a thylakoid, this right here is also a thylakoid. And the next one is called the stroma. The stroma is the liquid outside of the thylakoid. So this little empty space right here is not actually empty because it's kind of a liquid. But this space outside of the thylakoid, but inside the chlorophyll, is called the stroma. And where are chlorophylls located? They're located on the membrane, the membrane of the thylakoid. As you can see, it's also green. And this GIF right here shows you that this is a chloroplast, and chloroplast is what makes glucose for plants. And since plants are primary producers, they allow every other organism to use that glucose as a source of energy, because we as human beings, for example, cannot harvest light using our body, naturally at least. All right, let's quick review. What role do pigments play in the process of photosynthesis? I want you to pause the video and think about it. All right, the pigments harvest energy for plants and allow plants to use that energy to make glucose. So if you think about this, right, what you need to remember is that energy is something that can be converted from one type to another type. So sunlight is one type of energy, and glucose is another type of energy. ATP is another type of energy. But for plants, what they do is that they harvest the energy from sunlight and then turn that into glucose so that the plants can use the glucose for other cells, right? Every single cell needs to use glucose in order to produce ATP so that the cells can use ATP. What is the principal pigment in plants? That is chlorophyll. Why most plants will not grow well if kept under green light? Because plants absorb all the light other than green-yellow light. So if a plant is under green light, then the plant is reflecting all of the energy instead of absorbing energy, so then photosynthesis cannot happen. All right, now let's take a look at an overview of steps of photosynthesis. As you might remember, electrons have a negative charge, and what you need to remember is that the first step of photosynthesis is right here. Light hits chlorophyll and energy is absorbed, electrons are excited. So this is what I want you to do with me, okay? This will help you remember and get the questions right and really understand how photosynthesis works. So we have this right here is our chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is on the photosystem 1 on the thylakoid. So right here we have thylakoid membrane, which is where chlorophyll is located. So this is what you do, okay? You take another hand, you go, light comes into photosystem 2. Oh, this is photosystem 2 actually. Light comes into photosystem 2, electrons get excited. Do that. One more time. Light comes into photosystem 2, electrons get excited. Okay, so what am I doing? What am I doing with my hands? What are you doing with your hands? So this is what happens. Light itself, right? We talk about light having a lot of energy, and we talk about energy conversion. We have to convert one type of energy to another in order for that energy to be used by organisms. So when light hits the chlorophyll, again, chlorophyll is located on the thylakoid membrane, the outside little bubble membrane of the thylakoid. When that happens, the energy is being absorbed by the chlorophyll, right? We said pigments absorb the energy from the light. The next step is that electrons are excited by the light. So we have electrons have different energy levels, just like little kids, or like you, right? Sometimes the electrons are down and they're not very active, they can't do a whole lot. Sometimes the electrons get excited and that energy now is inside the electron and that energy can be used elsewhere. So then the next step, after the electrons get excited, what happens? Electrons need a carrier. So the electrons are, they're like little energetic little kids. We're talking about little kids a lot. But anyway, they can't get anywhere on their own. We have to have a carrier of electrons. So those are kind of like school bus. So this right here is called NADP+. NADP+ is what we call an electron carrier. They can carry the high energy electrons so that this electron that got excited right here can go somewhere else. So this process is done by NADP+. NADP+, what it actually does is that NADP+ binds with 2 electrons and a hydrogen and form NADPH. So NADPH right here has electrons inside of it, and NADPH is kind of similar to ATP. It has a lot of energy. Repeat after me. NADPH has a lot of energy. Go. All right. Repeat the other one as well. ATP has a lot of energy. Go. All right. So NADPH, right? This all happens at the thylakoid membrane. And when this chain of events, and we'll look at more details of it in class tomorrow and on Monday, but when this happens, the NADPH can power reactions at other parts of the cell. And then at last, those high energy electrons, that high energy electron, right, light comes into photosystem 2, electrons get excited, that high energy electrons, eventually that energy in the electrons are being used to make sugar, simple sugar. So for example, glucose is a monosaccharide. If you don't remember what monosaccharide is, please go look it up real quick because midterm is coming up, you need to know it. Those simple sugar can then be made into complex carbohydrates. And what happens to those carbohydrates? They get stored in the plants, and then when the plants needs to use energy, which is all the time, that carbohydrate is then turned into ATP by mitochondria, and then ATP is being used by the plants directly. So the next step, so let's look at this process kind of step by step again. The first step is energy collection by chlorophyll, right? Light comes into photosystem 2, electrons get excited. Let's just keep doing that. And we have a basketball player over here because he's the electron that got excited, right? He got the ball, that's the light, electrons get excited. So chlorophyll absorbs light energy, we already know that. Light energy is transferred to the electrons in the chlorophyll, right? It's an energy transfer process. the high energy electrons are steadily produced from light energy. So if you just look outside right now, even though it's kind of gloomy, there's still sunlight, there's still energy, and the plants that are still alive, well, the plants are alive. The plants that are alive, they are harvesting that energy to make sugar for themselves. So now, these high energy electrons are kind of like hot potatoes. Earlier we said they're excited little kids, that's fine. But if this one helps you a little bit better, you can imagine that way as well. So NADPH is like the oven mitt that carries the hot potato. And the hot potato is hot because it has all that energy that came from sunlight. So right here I have two potatoes. All right, and you see the two potatoes? And I have an oven mitt. And when the two potatoes get excited, now they're hot potatoes, we have to have the oven mitt, which is called NADP+, to carry these potatoes to somewhere else. I'm going to drop it off right here. Okay, so this process, this carrying the electrons to somewhere else so that the electrons and the energy inside the electron can be used somewhere else, this process is done by NADP+. But when the electrons are inside the NADP+, we have NADPH. So the oven mitt and the potato together, that's NADPH. Oven mitt itself, that's NADP+. Two electrons with energy, just a hot potato. So right here, you can fill in your notes. All right, so let's take a look at NADP+ again. The equation is this. You don't need to know how to draw these molecules, obviously, but you do need to know that NADP+ plus H plus two electrons makes NADPH. So NADPH has a hydrogen with it, obviously, but there are also two high energy electrons inside of it. So NADP+ holds two high energy electrons and a hydrogen ion and is converted into NADPH. And NADPH is what powers reactions elsewhere in the cell. So what it really does is that, let's take a look at the review and then we'll talk about NADPH and what it does again. What are electron carrier molecules? They carry high energy electrons so that those high energy electrons can be used in reactions elsewhere. What is the function of NADPH? They carry high energy electrons from the light dependent reaction to the light independent reaction. Again, NADPH carries high energy electron from the light dependent reaction to the light independent reaction. That makes sense because in order to get the high energy electron, you have to have light. The next step is how will photosynthesis be affected if there's a shortage of NADP+ in the cells of plants? If there's a shortage of NADP+, then you can't make NADPH. If you don't make NADPH, you can't send NADPH to do its job in the light independent reaction. And the result of that is the plants will not be able to produce sugar, and then the plants will die. So, right here, let's take a look at the overall equation of photosynthesis. The light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction are both a part of photosynthesis. So this right here is an overall. This includes light-dependent and light-independent, right? So if you look at your Amoeba Sister notes, they ask you to circle and square which one is the light-dependent and light-independent. So you absolutely need to know how to write this equation, both in words and in the chemical formula. So what we have is you need carbon dioxide, plants need carbon dioxide, that's common sense, plus water, and then you need sunlight, and all of that is converted into glucose and oxygen. So now, let's take a look at what is being used and what is being produced in the light-dependent reaction first. So this is the light-dependent reaction. It happens in the thylakoid and the thylakoid membrane. The light-dependent reaction needs light. The light-dependent reaction also needs water. What is produced during the light-dependent reaction is oxygen. So this oxygen is produced by water splitting, right? H2O, there's oxygen in there. When the water splits, you get oxygen. But the light-dependent reaction also produces just a few molecules of ATP, to fuel this other light-independent reaction. This is not the same amount of ATP as you would produce in during cellular respiration. And we also produce NADPH. Again, NADPH has a hydrogen, but most importantly, it has 2 high-energy electrons. All of this ATP and NADPH, goes into the stroma. Remember, that's kind of the liquid inside the thylakoid, outside of the thylakoid and inside the chloroplast. These energy that's in the ATP and the energy in the high energy electron inside NADPH combines with CO2 and then eventually makes sugar. Right, so this is our final product, that plants really need for itself is the sugar. And then since reactions can go backward, ATP, when it drops off its energy in this reaction, ADP is produced, and then it goes back to thylakoid. And then NADPH is produced, NADPH is used, and then NADP plus is produced again as NADPH drop off its electrons, and then NADP plus go back to the thylakoid. So this right here shows you the same thing. What comes in during the light dependent, what comes out, what comes in during the light independent, what comes out. You absolutely need to know this, okay? So here's a review reaction. What are the reactants and products? So think to yourself, you have to remember this. So the light dependent reaction, one more time, it takes place in the thylakoid. Light and water are absorbed. So if you can think about water split. So this is how this whole thing goes at the beginning, okay? Light comes into photosystem 2. Electrons get excited. Water splits. Electrons come to photosystem 2. So actually water splitting not only produces oxygen. Producing oxygen is not the purpose of plant. It just happened, luckily for us. But the water splitting actually gives a source of electron to the photosystem 2, right? If you keep on exciting the electrons, getting rid of the electrons, we're not going to have any more electrons. As the water splits, we have a continued replenish of electrons to allow the whole photosynthesis process to happen. So ATP and NADPH are produced, and those are used to produce high energy sugars in the light independent reaction. Oxygen is also produced. So the light independent reaction is also called the Kelvin cycle. This guy named Kelvin kind of figured out how this thing all works. But ATP and NADPH is used. Carbon dioxide is also used during the light independent reaction or the Kelvin cycle, and then the result is we finally produce sugar, which is what we want for plants. And this takes place in the stroma. So your last task is fill out this little chart by yourself. All right, the answer key is online, the PowerPoint is posted, but I want you to fill this out as a review. Our test next Tuesday is going to have this material, but our quiz tomorrow is not. But you do need to know that. Okay? Enjoy the rest of your day. Oh wait, we need to feature Marshy real quick. Marshy is not here because I left him at school because I didn't think we were gonna have snow. But here's a replacement Marshy. And then if you're interested, here he goes. Here's my roommate's cat. Have a good day, guys.